All right. Thank you all for joining us here tonight, this evening. I first want to thank you all again for joining us tonight for tonight's Cash for College workshop and town hall. My name is Roy Tongalava. I am a field representative with Senator Cortese here, and I will be tonight's moderator. I do want attendees to know that this town hall is being live streamed with closed captioning options available through Senator Cortese's website and Facebook page. Later in the program, there will be time for Q&A with the audience through the Zoom Q&A function. This evening's first speaker is Senator Dave Cortese. Senator Dave Cortese, please take it away.
Well, thank you, Roy, and thank you all of you who are supporting this event and who are here this evening. We appreciate you very much, and I know you're here to learn about resources that are available to students as they make their journey into college and adult life. I'm going to let the experts from the California Student Aid Commission do the work of sharing the details on financial aid options available to families and prospective students. But I'm so grateful that their team took the time to be here to answer your questions and frankly mine. I expect all of us will learn a lot this evening. I wanted to be sure to highlight some of the work we're doing in the state legislature to make it easier for all California students to access higher education before we get going. Last year, the state invested the most ever into California's higher education system in our state's history, $47.1 billion. The state also made historic investments in student housing, another $2 billion. And we know there's more work that needs to be done in that regard. We also passed landmark higher education bills that will improve all aspects of college affordability and access. Our neighbor, Assemblymember Berman, has led efforts to increase transfer rates, and we've made huge strides to do just that. For example, AB 928, Assemblymember Berman's bill, it requires the CSU system and the UC system to jointly establish a singular lower division general education pathway for transfer admission into both CSUs and UCs. Also, it requires the California community colleges to place students on an associate degree for transfer, otherwise known as ADT pathway, for their intended major when they declare a major. Another bill, AB 1111, also by Assemblymember Berman, requires California community colleges to adopt a common course numbering system for all community colleges and catalogs. I know just in the experience of my own 4 children, that is a huge improvement, getting everything on one numerical system. And to address student housing, collectively, we passed AB 1377 by Assemblymember McCarty. That requires the CSU system and requests the UC system to conduct a student housing needs assessment for each campus and to create a student housing plan. Again, these are bills that have already been signed into law. SB 330 by my colleague, Senator Durazo, requires the Los Angeles Community College District to develop a pilot program to provide affordable housing to students or employees of the LA Community College District. And this pilot will serve as a model for other community college districts. Again, and I hope you heard that, yes, that's a Los Angeles Community College bill or pilot program for now, but the idea is to expand that throughout the state of California. First, we need to prove it works. Lastly, to increase the number of students who receive financial aid, the state is also requiring all students to submit a free application for federal aid or California DREAM Act application, as the case may be. And we will hear more about both of those options very much so today. So with that, I want to turn it back to Roy to introduce our guest speakers. And once again, thank you to everyone, and particularly the presenters. I think those of you who signed up, who are here as participants, are really going to enjoy this.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Cortese, for that introduction and overview, and for your longstanding advocacy surrounding higher education. It is now with great pleasure that I turn to tonight's guest speaker from the California Student Aid Commission. First up, we have Edwin Chikukwa. And as a reminder for all of our attendees, throughout the presentation, if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to drop them in the Q&A function down below. Take it away, Edwin.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Senator Cortese. Thank you so much, Roy, for having me today. We're excited. We appreciate you, and we appreciate all the legislative bills that y'all passed to give us more money to be able to do the work that we do. And thank you, everybody, for coming today. Hopefully this should be really helpful. And this is perfect timing because we are creeping up to the March 2nd deadline. So this is perfect timing. But before I get into my presentation, I do also want to thank the CSAC team that is available and ready to answer your questions. And I know from my team, we have Israel Flores. We also have Jenny Jang who are available. And so with that being said, during the course of this presentation, please feel free to ask questions. Please feel free to use that Q&A function. Don't feel the need to wait till the end. Ask questions throughout. We'll be able to assist you. Before I get into it, a little introduction about myself. My name is Edwin Chikukwa, and I'm the Cash for College Coordinator at the California Student Aid Commission. And yeah, I'm here to talk to you all about financial aid. Now, I will say I talk a lot with my hands, so that can get really distracting. So what I'd like to do is I like to turn off my camera so that y'all can focus fully on the presentation and be engrossed and get all that financial aid information and you're not distracted. But before I get in, can everybody hear me clearly? Thumbs up, am I good to go? Do I sound okay? Is my mic working? Perfect, awesome. Okay, I'm gonna turn my camera off now and we're gonna get into this presentation. So what are the goals for today? So first of all, our goal today is to walk you all through the FAFSA or the California GMAC application. And then after that, we're going to review parts of the application that may be difficult. We're not going to go through the entirety of the applications. We're just going to review the difficult parts that we assume y'all might have some problems with. And then we're going to answer your questions. And like I said, please use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Do not hesitate. If we don't get to your question during this presentation, we'll answer it at the end. We want to make sure that we answer all questions. And if there's a question we can't answer, then we'll give you an email and we'll get back to you via email with your specific answer to your question. Now, there are two applications. There is the California GMAC application. That is typically for our undocumented student population. And then there's the free application for federal student aid. That is the FAFSA. That is typically for our permanent residents and our US citizens. Each student must only fill out one of these applications, not both. So you shouldn't be filling out both the FAFSA and the CADA. You should be filling out one. Now, I'll get into it a little bit later on who else should be filling out which application. I'll explain that a little bit later in the presentation. But just so you all know, typically undocumented students are the ones who should be filling out the CADA, which is the shorthand for California GMAC applications. I'm going to be referring to it as the CADA. And permanent residents and US citizens should be filling out the FAFSA, which is also shorthand for free application for federal student aid. Something to note about these applications, they're very similar. And California GMAC application is a state application. FAFSA is a federal application. Since it's a state application, it's an application we made for our undocumented student population, and it very much mirrors the FAFSA. So whenever I'm talking about the applications in general, most of the information I will be saying will apply to both. When there's a difference, I'm going to be sure to note that difference. And if you're not sure, please feel free to ask a question. Now, in this particular situation, this is something that applies to both applications. So when we're filling out these applications, you always want to make sure that you're using tax information from prior. So the best way I like to think about it is, let's talk about the academic year the student is going into, right? Most students right now who are filling out their financial aid applications, they're applying for the 2022-2023 academic year. That would also be the financial aid year they'll be applying for. They'll be applying for the 2022-2023 financial aid year because that's the academic year they plan on attending. Now, the way the calculation works in financial aid is that you should use prior tax information. So you're always using prior tax information. So if you're applying for the 2022-2023 academic year or financial aid year, then you're going to be using 2020 tax information. I already know right off the bat that for some of you, some alarm bells are going up. You're like, wait a minute, 2020 and 2022, a lot has happened between 2020 and my financial situation does not look like what it looked like in 2020. Totally understand that. We'll talk about those types of circumstances later. But right now, when you're filling out the application, you're using information from prior. So since we're talking about 2022, 2023, we'll be using 2020 tax information. How much money can I get? That is the question that the majority of you have on your mind. That is the reason that you're here. You want to find out how much money can you get? And I'm going to give you the same answers, the same frustrating answers our lawyers at CSAC always give me whenever I ask them a question. The answer is it depends. See, the way it works is cost of attendance. So cost of attendance is the university or college you want to go to. But some of you may want to go to a community college. Some of you may want to go to a four-year public university. Some of you may want to go to a four-year private college. All of these have a completely different cost of attendance. So I can't give you a specific amount because it really does depend on which institution you plan on going to. So that's your cost of attendance. And then we'll look at expected family contribution. That shorthand for that is EFC, is calculated by what you put in your application. So once again, that will be different for everybody. And so once we know the cost of attendance based off the college the student is planning on going to, and we know the expected family contribution, we subtract the expected family contribution from the cost of attendance, and that gives us the student's financial need, and that pretty much tells us how much the student should be receiving awards. So once again, that's pretty much how the calculation works with financial aid. We can't give you a one size fits all, but this is the formula we use in order to calculate what the financial aid award should be. How much federal student aid can I receive? So right here, this is something where I want to note. Remember how I said the FAFSA is a federal application and the CADA is a state application. So because we're talking federal aid, unfortunately, undocumented students cannot get federal aid. So when we're talking about federal aid, we're talking about those people who are filing the FAFSA, which would be our U.S. citizens and permanent residents. And so in terms of the FAFSA, in terms of federal aid, there's the federal Pell Grant. And whenever you hear the term grant in financial aid, that is money you don't have to pay back. Once again, I'm going to repeat that. That is money you don't have to pay back. So that federal Pell Grant, that's $6,495. That is money that does not have to be paid back. And then the other thing is work study. When you're filling out the FAFSA, it will ask you, would you like to have work study? It will literally ask you that. Would you like to have work study? And a bunch of students are just like, I don't know what that is. So I'm just going to say no. Don't do that. Don't be that student. Today, I'm going to tell you what work study is. The way it works is, let's say a student wants to get a job. Let's say you're a student, you're in college, and you're like, man, things are expensive. I need a job. And you need a job to subsidize your living. And so if you have work study and it is a work study job, the way it will work is, let's say the job pays $15 an hour. I'm using hypothetical numbers here, so bear with me. But let's say it pays $15 an hour. Your employer will pay you $10, and the federal government will pay you like $5 and the rest of the $5 so that you can get to $15. So you're still getting your $15 an hour, but your employer is not paying you that full $15 because the federal government is subsidizing a portion of your salary. So this is very attractive for college employers, and a lot of jobs at college campuses are purely work study jobs. They would not hire students who don't have work study. So when you get offered work study, please take it because it does run out at institutions. It's very much based on institutions. So it does run out. And so when you're asked on the application if you want it, please take it. It's a really great benefit. A lot of students use it, and a lot of jobs on college campuses will not accept you unless you have it. Direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans. The main thing I'll focus here on is subsidized loans. Listen carefully. Subsidized loans do not accrue interest while the student is in school. I'll repeat that again. Subsidized loans do not accrue interest while the student is in school. They accrue interest once the student leaves school. Whereas unsubsidized loans, the moment you take them out, even if you're in school, the moment you take them out, they start accruing interest. So if you're offered between a subsidized and an unsubsidized loan, it's pretty clear which one makes the most financial sense to take. Obviously, the subsidized loan because it doesn't accrue interest while the student's in school. They do have the same interest rates, but once again, one doesn't accrue interest while you're in school, which is the subsidized, whereas the unsubsidized does accrue interest while the student is in school. And then we have the direct plus loan. Some people call it the parent plus loan. And this is the loan a parent can take on behalf of their child in order to cover the financial aid. Once again, these are federal loans, so they tend to have lower interest rates than private market loans. So this is why they're attractive. They tend to have lower interest rates than private market loans. But the direct plus loan, the parent plus loan, It's like an unsubsidized loan in that it does accrue interest while the student's in school. So the moment it's taken out, it does start accruing interest. So those are some of the main federal aid programs. If y'all have questions about that, please feel free to ask in the Q&A, and I'm sure someone will definitely get to y'all. Now we're talking about state aid. And state aid, both FAFSA filers and CADA filers are eligible for state aid. Now, California has one of the most generous, if not the most generous, state aid, but probably out of most of the other states in the entire United States. So, for example, our biggest program that most people know us for is the Cal Grant, California Grant, very cleverly named, Cal Grant. You see what we did there? But that is the Cal Grant. It is at a UC, it goes towards tuition and fees. At a UC, it's about $12,570. At a CSU, $5,742. At a community college, it depends. It can be put on reserve because community colleges have the California Promise Grant. We can talk about it a little bit later. But then we have private schools too. It pretty much can cover tuition and fees at some institution, or it will go towards your tuition and fees at other institutions. Also, if you are a student who has dependent children, you can get an additional access award in addition to the tuition and fees portion for your dependent children. So really great financial aid program to have. Now, the next slide I have is going to break it down a little bit more of what it looks like at different institutions. So there's different Cal Grant programs. Cal Grant A and B are typically for your traditional academic course, as well as Cal Grant C is for your technical and vocational school training. But the way it works is Cal Grant A, if you go to a community college, it's going to be put on reserve. And because once again, it's for tuition and fees. And then once you graduate from community college and you get that transfer entitlement, we'll talk about entitlements later, you will pretty much have that money go to tuition and fees. At a CSU, $5,742 will go towards tuition and fees because they have a lower tuition and fees. At a UC, $12,570. At a private, y'all see the numbers. Cal Grant B has what we call an access award. Now, the way Cal Grant B works is in its first year, you don't get the tuition and fees portion, you just get the access award. And then after that, you get the tuition and fees and access award. So if you're at a community college, you can actually start getting the access award if you have a Cal Grant B. You won't get a tuition and fees portion at a community college, but you will get the access award. And then once you go to a CSU or a UC, you get the tuition and fees and access award portion. But if you start at a UC, CSU, or private school in your first year as a freshman, then you wouldn't get the tuition and fees portion. You just get the access award in the first year. And then obviously Cal Grant C, similar rules, but this one's for technical vocational school training, and you have the access award, and you have all these other types of award. So that is the Cal Grant program. Very, very generous program. Definitely the way you qualify for it is by filling out the financial aid applications, either the FAFSA or the CADA. So you don't directly apply for a Cal Grant. You have to fill out either a FAFSA or a CADA, and then we determine if you're eligible. And by the way, the FAFSA and the CADA are free. So I don't know if that was clear or not, if y'all have any questions, but the FAFSA and the CADA, these financial aid applications are free. They're going to take a little time, maybe like 1 hour, 2 hours to fill out, but they're free. But if you look at all this money that's here, 1 hour, 2 hour investment for potentially a $12,570 tuition and fee grant that you don't have to pay back every year for 4 years at a UC, plus a potential Pell Grant. That's a lot of money just for 2 hours of work, right? So definitely recommend, please, please, please fill out those applications. They're free. I know it can be annoying. I know it's not the most fun thing to do, but I know since y'all are here, you're interested in your money. And if you want to get the best bang for your buck, then please fill out these applications as soon as possible. Something I hear quite often is, well, I feel like I make too much money and I don't know if it's even worth for me to apply. I feel like I make too much money. And the thing is, we always tell you, don't self-select. Like, let us do our job. We will tell you whether you're eligible or not. And in addition to that, there's things like the middle class scholarship, which waive tuition and fees, which waive 35% of tuition and fees at UCs and CSUs. So don't count yourself out. You don't know what you might get. Please still fill out these applications. And another pro tip we always like telling people, colleges use these applications for their own institutional aid. So I'm not even going to cover institutional aid because it's individual to each college. But if you want to get a scholarship from your college, or if you want to get certain grants and things from your college, they're going to ask you to fill out these applications. So please just fill them out anyway. Just do it anyway. You can qualify for so many different types of aid. It's just going to take some time, but it's definitely worth it. And then we have our Chafee grant. Chafee grant, that is for our foster youth or those rewards of the court. We're going to talk about that a lot at the end, so I'm not going to get into it. But all I'm going to say here is if you are a foster youth or ward of the court for at least, if you were in foster care for at least a day between the ages of 16 and 18, you definitely want to self-identify. Please do not be shy. There's a lot of financial aid out there for you all for that specific population. So please feel free to self-identify, and we'll talk about the JFE grant a little bit later. Now, before you begin, some things that you want to make sure that you have. First of all, your name. Now, this is going to sound really stupid because I know some of y'all looking at me like, we're in this webinar and he's telling us to get our name right. And I'm going to tell you, absolutely, yes, I am telling you to get your name right. I am absolutely telling you to get your name right. Here's why. And this slide is going to come up a lot. Here's why we have to remind people to get their names right. What happens in financial aid is the school uploads the GPA of the student, and then the student fills out the application. And then we, at the Student Aid Commission, we match that information. The most common reason applications don't match, and then we can award students if the application doesn't match, but the most common reason they don't match is students don't get their names right. So students will put in a nickname, they will put in a short version of their name, they will just put in other things, and it's like, please put in your name, just put in your full government name. And I'll give you all a pro tip to make sure you get your name right. If you're filling out the FAFSA, use the name on your social security card. If you're filling out the California GMAT application, use the name on your school records because we want those applications to match. Usernames and passwords, pretty straightforward. Please make sure you write that down. But if you forget, you can always do like the forgot password. So I'm not going to go into that too much. Email address is something I really want to focus here. Please, students and parents, because parents, a lot of you will have to fill out this application too. If your child is under 24, just assume as a parent, you also have to fill out the application. I will go into more specific detail, but just assume that for now, if your child is under 24, that you have to also fill out the application. But email address, please make sure you're not using an institutional email. Please make sure you're not using an institutional email, because what tends to happen is students will be like, okay, this is education, so I should use my school email. Wrong, don't do that. Because let's say you're in high school and you use your high school email. Once you graduate, you get kicked off your high school server. You no longer have access to that email or anything that comes to that email. And the problem with that is these financial aid applications are applications you have to fill out yearly, every single year while you're attending school. So you want to make sure that you have a personal email that you have access to for multiple years. And so PIN numbers and secret questions, y'all got that. I'm not going to get into much of that. But name, please make sure you get that right. And please make sure you avoid using an institutional email. Now, back to the FAFSA. Who can apply? So once again, U.S. citizens, legal permanent residents, certain designations, including refugees or those granted asylum, and T visa holders. So those are the individuals who can apply. And once again, you should only be filling out one of these applications between the FAFSA and the CADA. You should not be filling out both. But you also need to make sure that you're filling out the right one based off your citizenship status. So this is who can apply for the FAFSA. Now, in order to apply for the FAFSA, you do need to create what is called an FSA ID. It's kind of like a login. But not just to you, if you are what we call a dependent student. So remember how earlier I said, parents, if your child is under 24 and they're filling out the application, assume you have to fill it out too. So what I was referring to is what we call dependency. So there's two types of students, and the application will tell you which type of student you are. It will ask you, we'll talk about it later, but it will tell you and it will determine which type of student you are. There's dependent students and independent students. Dependent students need their own information. They need to sign it, plus their parents' information, plus their parent signature in order for the application to be considered complete. Independent students just need their own information and their own signature, and then the application is complete. So that is the difference between dependent and independent students. We'll break it down a little bit more who's who, but once again, just assume if you're a student and you're under the age of 24, just assume for now that you're a dependent student. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, but I'm 18. I'm no longer living in my parents' house. My parents are not going to give me money. That's not how it works. The federal government has its own set of rules, and we use these rules for the California GMAT application too. So if you're under the age of 24, assume that parent information is going to be needed. Now, the reason why I'm stressing this is when the student creates their own FSA ID, the parent, if the student is a dependent student, they're going to need their parents to also create an FSA ID, because the FSA ID is how the parent will sign the application. Now, an FSA ID, in order to create it, you need an email, you need a date of birth, and you need a social security number in order to create an FSA ID. So those are some things to remember. Now, we know that people live in mixed status households. So a student might have a social security number. They might be a permanent resident or a U.S. citizen, but the parent might be undocumented. What do we do in that particular situation? In that particular situation, that student should be filling out the FAFSA, first of all. But we know, let's say the student is a dependent, so they're dependent, so they need the parent information and the parent signature. But remember how we said you need an FSA ID to sign, but an FSA ID requires a social security number? Well, if the parent is undocumented, they won't be able to create an FSA ID. So what we do and what we recommend in that situation is the parent and the student should still fill out the application. And then once it gets to the signing portion, the student should sign their application, and then they should print out the signature page, have the parent sign it, the undocumented parent, or the parent who's having trouble creating FSA ID, because sometimes parents just struggle creating the FSA ID because either it could be a fraud issue, it could be something wrong with their social, or they don't have a social. But yeah, in that particular situation, print out the signature page. The address of where the signature page should be mailed to will be on the signature page. And so the student should just have their parents sign it and then mail it in as soon as possible. Going forward with this, if the student, once again, is living in a mixed status household where the parent is undocumented, well, the application will ask for the parent's social security number at some point. In those particular situations, if the parent does not have a social security number, they should put in all zeros. And we want to make this very clear that this information does not get shared with immigration services, or we don't share immigration status information. So this information is very secure. That would actually be illegal for us to do that. So we don't do that. So please understand that this information is secure. Now, demographic information. Remember how I said this accurate name thing is going to keep coming back? Well, here it is again. Please, please, please make sure you get your demographic information correct. Accurate name, date of birth, correct address, email address. I'm also talking to you parents who love to fill things out for your children. Don't confuse your children with the other children. Like, I know sometimes children have siblings and you forget whose birthday it is, and then you confuse the birthdays. Please, please, please don't do that. Just sit in a room, and if you can, or virtual Zoom webinar or whatever, Zoom meeting, and figure it out together. Students, I'm talking to you too. If you're filling out your parents' portion and you forgot their birthday, ask them. Don't be shy. I know it's an awkward conversation. I've been there too. I'm like, Mom, what's your birthday? And she might get mad. Dad, what's your birthday? They might get mad. Your guardians might get mad, but thousands of dollars are on the line. It's worth them getting mad for a little bit for the thousands of dollars that you could get yearly. So just get over it. Please make sure you get this demographic information correct. And once again, that email address, avoid using institutional emails. Please use personal emails. Now, another thing, email and postal address. I think I've gone over this, but also on the postal address portion, please make sure that you're using a postal address. Please make sure that you're using a postal address so that a student has access to for while they're in college. So let's say if they get mail and stuff like that, please make sure that the student is putting a postal address that they will have access to, typically a home or a family address, not one that is constantly changing. So please make sure that you just take care of that. Now, whose information goes on the application? And this applies to both the FAFSA and the California GMAT application. So whose information goes on the application? So we're gonna play a little game. Who's my parent? So the first question you ask is, are your parents married to each other? If the answer is yes, simple, both parents' information goes on the application, done. If the answer is no, then the next question we have to ask is, do your parents live together? If the answer is yes, your parents are unmarried, but they live together, then both parents' information goes on the application. If the answer is no, then we ask another question. Okay, who did you live with more over the past 12 months? Do you live with one more of the past 12 months? If the answer is yes, then you live with the one who you lived with more on the past 12 months. If the answer is no, we go to another question. Now, I always find this weird because I'm like, there's 365 days in a year. How does it work that you didn't live with one more than the other? That's a weird thing. That's a weird quirk I have. But I guess some people look at it from 6 months. So I can see that too. But if you're in a situation where your parents are unmarried, do not live together, and you pretty much spent the same amount of time with both of them, then you want to focus on who's financially supporting you the most. Who was financially supporting you the most in the past year? And that's the parent you put on the application. Now, In situations where we have a parent who is financially supporting the student the most in the past year, and the parents were unmarried, not living together, and the student spent the same amount of time with them, or in a situation where the parents were unmarried, not living together, but the student spent amount of time with one parent more than the other, if either one of those parents, the one who the student spent more time with, or the one who the student was receiving the most financial support from, if in those situations, either of those parents remarries, then the student should put their step parent. So if the parent remarries, the student should put their step parent. If the parent has not remarried, then the student is done. So if there's any questions about that, please feel free to ask, but that's pretty much how it works. This should cover about 90%, 99% of whose parent information goes on either the California GMAT application or the FAFSA. Other thing that we like to note is that the following people are not your legal guardians. So we like to note that the problem people are, so unless they have legally adopted you. And legal adoption, typically people have a loose definition of legal adoption, but in financial aid, the way it works is that custody has to be terminated and the guardianship has to be done through a court. So it can't be done through a private attorney. It has to be done through a court. You have to actually go to court and the judge has to say, okay, these are now your legal guardians. So just because you live with these individuals, a widowed step-parent, aunts, uncles, foster parents, grandparents, older brothers, sisters, even quote-unquote legal guardians, unless it was done through a judge, through a court, then in financial aid purposes, those people do not count as people who have legally adopted you, and you would still be asked to put in your biological parents' information. And we know that's going to raise some questions for some people, but we'll talk about some special circumstances later. Nothing that we like to advise is do not confuse parent information questions with student information questions. Once again, this is for the parents who love to fill out the applications for their kids. When the application is saying you or yours, it's not talking about you, mom and dad. It's not talking about you, legal guardian. It's talking about the student most of the time. When it's talking about the parents or the legal guardians, it will make that very clear. So, but most of the time when the application is saying you and yours, it's talking about the student. We'll talk about this later. Student gender, it will make more sense a little bit later. But income and asset questions, for our dependent students, you will be asked for your own income and assets as well as your parents' income and assets. So please make sure you just get your tax information ready. And remember, we're always using prior tax information. So for this year, it'll be that 2020 tax information. Maybe the next year when you apply 23, 24, it would be the 2021 tax information, but this year is 2020. And so income and asset questions, we want to make sure you answer those. But we also want to make sure that we're answering all the mandatory questions, and that's pretty straightforward. For our FAFSA filers, you have what is called the IRS data retrieval tool. And the cool thing about the application is that while you're filling out the application, FAFSA filers, and this once again, the reason why I'm saying FAFSA filers is because this only applies to FAFSA filers. While you fill out the application will ask you a couple of questions, and it will say, and it will, once you answer those, I think it'll ask you like about 3 questions, and then it will say, okay, we think you're eligible for the IRS data retrieval tool. Would you like to use it? Please do. What will then happen is you'll click yes, it will take you to another page to the IRS. You put in some information to verify that it's you. And then once you complete that process, very quick process, the IRS will transfer your tax information from their database onto your financial aid application in an encrypted manner that only the colleges that you send your application to can see. And this is a really great tool because 1, it makes it so much easier to fill out your application because you don't have to put in that information because the IRS did it for you. 2, it makes it less likely for you to be selected for a process called verification. 1 in 5 people who fill out a financial aid application will be selected for verification, which means they have to verify that their tax documents are accurate. And the colleges will ask for some additional tax information. And so if you use the IRS data retrieval tool, it significantly lowers your chances of being selected for verification. Now, there are some people who cannot use the IRS data retrieval tool. Once again, the application will let you know. But if you can, please do use it. Another thing that we come up with that we like to tell people is if you're unsure of the exact amounts, guess. I know that sounds weird, right? Like, yes, are you sure? Like, yes. And what we mean by that is sometimes you're filling up the application, right? And you'll put in your income and then the application will tell you, hey, you should have filed taxes. And you're like, ooh, I didn't file taxes. And it's like, oh, this is awkward. Should I stop? No, complete the application. Put in your best guesses. And the reason why we say that is I brought up earlier March 2nd. Well, I'm going to explain to you why March 2nd is important now. March 2nd is extremely important because remember the Cal grants I was talking about, all those big chunks of financial aid? Well, the way they work is if you're going to a four-year university, if you're going to a four-year university, even if you meet the income and asset requirements, right, in order for you to be eligible to get an entitlement award, an entitlement means you're just automatically going to get it without doing anything else, then you need to submit your application by March 2nd. That is a state aid priority deadline. If you don't do that and you're going to a four-year university and you don't submit your application by March 2nd, you get put in what is called the competitive pool. And even if you met all the other eligibility requirements, you just for missing that deadline, you get put in what's called the competitive pool. And in this competitive pool, they have done the statistics and students have a better chance of winning in Vegas than they do of getting a Cal grant once they're in the competitive pool. So literally by not applying by March 2nd, you are gambling away thousands of dollars. And so you do not want to be in that situation. Get your application in there by March 2nd so that you can be entitled to that state aid. Now, community college students, your deadline is a little different. Yours is September 2nd. However, we still want you to get it in as soon as possible. It doesn't hurt you at all. And so bringing it back to the last point on this slide where we say unsure of the exact amount to guess, what we're saying is if you realize, hey, I need to file my taxes, but by the time my taxes are complete, it'll be past March 2nd, it's better you complete the application, put in the information there, and then once your taxes are complete, come back and update the information. You can actually update these applications. So that's completely fine. But we just want you to make sure that you get it in there by March 2nd. And if you have any questions about that, please feel free to ask. Some other things, some common errors. This just comes from high school students overthinking things. But we like to tell high school students when they're filling out the application, when they ask them stuff like, what will your college grade level be when you begin in 2022, 2023? You'll be never attended college first year. When it's asked them what college degree or certificate will you be working on when you begin the 2022-2023 school year, it'll be their first bachelor's degree. So we definitely want to make sure that they are getting that stuff right. College selection. So first thing we always want to tell people about in the college selection is that when it comes to college selection, you can search your college without having to type in the full name. It's like a little quick trick. So for me, my college was University of California, Santa Barbara. That's a mouthful. That's a lot. I don't want to type that in there. So I just type in Santa and boom, all the colleges with Santa in them come up and I click Santa Barbara and I'm good to go. And if you forgot how to spell your college, it's a helpful tool. But that's something that's available both on the CADA and the FAFSA. But another thing, which we really want to emphasize, and I hope everybody is paying attention to this portion. Please, please, please pay attention. This is critical information. When you are selecting your colleges, you have the option to select 10 colleges. Make sure there is a California college in that initial list of 10. We actually recommend putting in a college from each segment, a community college, a California private college, a California private four-year college, a California public four-year college. Just make sure, but at least one California college in the initial list of 10. The reason being is because when you do that, we get your application and we can consider you for a Cal grant. If you don't do that, we won't be able to consider you for a Cal grant. And in order for us to consider you for a Cal grant, you'll have to submit some additional documentation. You don't want to do all that. So just make sure you put in a California college in your initial list of 10. Now, I can already hear some of you saying, what if I don't want to go to a California school? I hate California. It's burning all the time, something along those lines. I hear you. Okay. You can always come back and add a new list of 10 a week later. And all 20 of those colleges will still get your information. And they won't know what order you put them in. It really doesn't matter. They won't know what order you put them in. But putting that California college in the initial list of 10 is extremely important. So that's something we like to emphasize, that once again, these colleges don't know what order you put them in on the application. They have no idea. They just know, hey, someone is thinking about us and they're happy. But we really want to make sure that you put in that California college in the initial list of 10 so that we can receive your application and process for a Cal grant. And the reason why that is important, even if you're considering going out of state, is out-of-state tuition is really high. I'm not sure if y'all have seen it, but out-of-state tuition is ridiculously high. And if you have a chance of getting some state aid at some California institutions while also paying in state tuition, that might change your decision. We see it all the time where students were like, I was going to go out of state, and then I saw how much financial aid I was going to get in California, and I'm staying here. So we definitely want to make sure that you can see and view all your options before making a final decision. And the best way to do that is, once again, make sure you put a California college in your initial list of 10. If you have more colleges, you can always come back a week later, replace the initial list of 10 with the new set, and all those colleges will still get your application. Dependency questions, the thing I've been talking about for a while now. So dependency, the way it works is, once again, if you're a dependent student, it means you need parent information and parent signature in addition to your own information and signature to complete the application. If you're independent, then that just means you need your own information and own signature. The way we determine it is we ask you a bunch of questions on the application. So the application will ask you a list of questions. This is some of them, not all of them, but this is some of them, not all of them. So you can kind of take a look to get a sense of what they are. And if you answer no to all of these questions, then you're a dependent student. If you answer yes to any one of these questions, then you're an independent student. Now, in some cases, some colleges might ask you for more verification to prove that you're an independent student. Not all the time, but in some cases. So please just be aware of that. But once again, if you answer no to all these questions, dependent, answer yes to any one of them, independent. And dependent means you need parent information and signature. Independent means you don't need parent information and signature to complete your application. Now, what if my parents live in another country? What do I do if my parents live in another country? I'm living with my aunt and uncle. Remember, we talked about adoption. We talked about that a little bit earlier. But I'm living with my aunt and uncle. My parents live in another country. My biological parents live in another country. Whose information am I putting on? Well, unless your aunt and uncle or whoever your guardians are have legally adopted you, you should be putting in your biological parents' information if the application tells you you are a dependent student. So now we understand that sometimes you can't get a hold of your biological parents, or it's not a good idea for you to be in contact with your biological parents. We get that in financial aid. We know that special circumstances do arise, and there's always exceptions to the rule. If you feel like your situation is a special circumstance, we recommend going to a financial aid office because they have the power to do what is called a dependency override. So they can change your dependency status from being a dependent student to an independent student. Can't come to us. We can't do much about it. We're the Student Aid Commission. We would love to do something about it, but we can't. So please contact your college and they'll be able to do something if you feel like you are a special circumstance. And something else we also like to note, like you can always fill out the application without parent information, even if you're a dependent student. Now, we know a lot of parents try to be sneaky. They're like, hey, I think you can get more financial aid if I don't put my information on the application. And they try to sneak the system. And it's like, okay, if you do that, parents, please listen carefully. If you tell your children that terrible advice, what will happen is your child will only be eligible for unsubsidized loans. Even if they qualify for grants, federal grants, state grants, they won't be able to get that stuff. They'll be only eligible for unsubsidized loans. If the application tells them they're a dependent student and they don't put in the parent information. So that's just an extra bonus for you all, parents and students. If the application tells you you're a dependent student and you don't have a special circumstance that you can go to a college for them to do that override, then please make sure you get that parent information in the application as well as that parent signature. Otherwise, as a student, you will not be able to qualify for the potential full max aid that you could have qualified for. Household size. Main thing we'd like to point out on this household size question is that it's not really based off who claimed who on whose taxes. The calculation is simply put this way. If the head of the household, if you're a child, you're always going to count as a part of the household. If the head of the household is going to be supporting you 50% plus or more in the coming year, or if you are deemed a dependent by the FAFSA based off those list of questions I showed you earlier. So if you're a child, you always count if you're a dependent based off the list of questions I showed you earlier, or if you're going to be supported 50% plus or more in the coming academic year. So they always count as a part of the household. Children always count if they fall under those specific circumstances. Anybody else has to both live with the head of household and be supported 50% plus or more in the next coming year. So a child can go study abroad if they're getting that support, or if they're considered dependent by the application, then even if they're studying abroad, even if they're in college, if they're not living with the head of household, then they're part of the household. Whereas anybody else, so let's say the head of household is supporting a family outside of the country, like aunts and uncles, they would not count. But if the aunts and uncles or the grandparents are living and also receiving that support, then they count as a part of the household. And so that's how the household calculation works. If y'all have any questions about that, please feel free to ask. And I know Israel, Jenny, and Judith will be able to get to you. Selective service. So this is something we can definitely thank our legislators for too. So selective service, all males between the ages of 18 to 25 are required to register for selective service. In previous years, that used to be a requirement for financial aid. So if a male student or a student who was assigned the male sex at birth did not register for selective service, they would not be able to get financial aid. Now, you're still required to register for selective service, but it's no longer a requirement for financial aid. So we can thank our legislators for that. That's one less step stopping students from getting financial aid. So once again, want to make sure we're very clear about the messaging. Male students between the ages of, or students who are assigned the male sex at birth, between the ages of 18 and 25 should still register for selective service. However, it's not something that's going to hold up their financial aid anymore. So if you're on the application and it says, have you registered for selective service, you can click no, and it's not going to stop you from getting financial aid. In previous years, it would, but no longer. And so that we can thank our legislators for. So thank you. Special circumstances. I mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation, but remember how I said in financial aid, we use prior tax information. Well, once again, a lot's happened between 2020 and now. And things have changed. Some people's families don't look the same way they looked. So they could have been a divorce, there could have been a loss of job, death in the family, unexpected medical expenses, a bunch of different things. All these things are what we call a special circumstance. And if there's a special circumstance which affected you where you feel like, okay, this is definitely changing how my family will be able to contribute to my education, then please, what we recommend, and this is not reflected in my 2020 tax information, what we recommend is you go to your financial aid office. Students, please go to your financial aid office. Let them know what the circumstance is. They can do what is called a professional judgment and actually adjust your financial aid award. So please talk to them. They have the power to do this, and they might ask for some additional documentation, and it's pretty different at every college, but they have the power to do this and to change your financial aid award based on new circumstances. So please not be shy about going to your financial aid office. They can definitely adjust your award so that it reflects your current situation. So some helpful hints, March 2nd deadline. I pretty much explained why that's important, but just to remind y'all, it's coming up close. Please make sure you get those applications in by March 2nd. It will just make your life so much easier. You do not want to be put in the competitive pool for state aid. Once again, you are literally gambling away your financial aid because you have a high chance of winning in Vegas than you do of getting the state aid if you do it after March 2nd. So please, please, please make sure students are getting those applications in by March 2nd. Apply regardless of income. Don't self-select. Let us do the math. Let us do the calculations. Please don't self-select. Check your email regularly. I talked about verification earlier, where sometimes you fill out your financial aid application and you get an email saying, we need to verify some things on your application and we need some tax documents. We need more tax documents. Please check your email, students, because you don't want to be in a situation where you're all happy. It's the first day of school and you're being told your financial aid you didn't pay your tuition. You're like, wait, I thought I got financial aid. It's like, no, you didn't, because you didn't finish the verification process. So all this to say, please, please, please check your email. As long as you check your email, most of these situations can be resolved really quickly. And lastly, don't be afraid to ask for help. I know if y'all are here, you probably are not afraid to ask for help, but please don't be afraid to ask for help. You see this hotline, this 888 number, that's a number you can call during business hours from 8 a.m. to 4:45 p.m. That's the CSAC number, and we'll be able to help you. So please don't be shy to ask for help. Some common application mistakes: get the correct academic year. So once again, the best way to think about this is if I'm applying for financial aid for the school year 2022-2023, that is the financial aid year I should be picking on my financial aid application. Application was submitted after March 2nd deadline. I've talked about this. Get it in there. We're getting close. We're about, we're 3 weeks away? Yeah, we're 3 weeks away. Ooh, things are getting intense. The name on the application is listed incorrectly. I think y'all have heard enough of me talking about the names. So please make sure you get your name right, or it does not match the name on the GPA. So please make sure you get your name right so that it matches what your schools are uploading. Mandatory question was not answered. That's pretty straightforward. The application was not signed by a parent for dependent students. Once again, that severely limits the amount of aid a student can get if the parents don't do their part. So parents, please do your part. The application was saved but not submitted. Ooh, that's a big one. You want to make sure you're submitting and you're completing that application. A required paper signature was required but not sent. So this for our FAFSA filers who were either in mixed status households or the parent just had difficulties creating that FSA ID. Please make sure you send in the paper signature if you're in that situation. Or there were other unresolved errors on the application. This is something to really note. A lot of times on the application, I know specifically for the CADA, when you get the confirmation page of you finishing your application, it will tell you what's not done yet, and it will give you some reminders. Please read those things, because those are things you still have to do in order for your application to be considered complete. Chafee grant programs for foster youth. So I said, I'll talk about this, and guess what? I'm talking about it. So once again, the main thing is that Chafee grant of foster youth, they can qualify for up to $5,000 annually for 5 years. And all they have to do is once fill out their financial aid application, their FAFSA or their CADA. They have to do that yearly. And then they have to additionally fill out a Chafee grant application. It's a pretty quick application, and you'll have to do it once. There's no deadline associated with this application, just has to be done once. And yeah, and then the student will have access to $5,000 every single year, in addition to all the other types of aid they can qualify for. Another thing, and once again, the qualification is that you must have been awarded the court or lived in foster care for at least a day between the ages of 16 and 18. And you also have to be under the age of 26. And so that's pretty much kind of how it works. Another thing that we also have is the Cal Grant Access Award. And remember, Cal Grant Access Awards are awards that you get on top of the Cal Grant Award that covers the tuition and fees. So it would be on top of that tuition and fees award that you get an Access Award. And so there's a Chafee Cal Grant Access Award for former foster youth, and that's $6,000. So a Chafee student could get $5,000 from the Chafee grant. They get $6,000 from the Cal Grant Access Award. They get the Cal Grant tuition and fees portion. And once again, all they have to do is fill out their financial aid applications with their FAFSA or their CADA. And in addition to that, fill out the Chafee grant application once. And then they're good to go. So once again, we definitely want to make sure that our Chafee students are getting this information, because we know there's a population that really struggles with our education. So we want to make sure that this information is going out there so that they know how much is out there for them. And yeah, the Access Awards, the Chafee grants, they can be used for a variety of things: rent, housing, transportation, childcare, post-grad studies. And once again, like I said earlier, you don't have to get that Chafee grant application in by March 2nd. You don't have to have a social security number. You don't have to provide a GPA, all these other things, as you can see from the slide. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for our former foster youth to be able to access these awards. And then, like I said, we want to make sure in order to keep qualifying for it, you fill out your FAFSA and your CADA annually. Your Chafee application, that has to be done once. And then also want to make sure that CDSS foster youth status wanted to be verified within a month of submitting your financial aid and Chafee applications. And once again, this is also a one-time requirement. So that being said, about to wrap up here. So please follow us on social media. You can see our Twitter, our Instagram, our Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. We post a lot of great content. So please, please, please follow us. Can't guarantee that we'll follow you back, but you'll learn some stuff. You will definitely learn some stuff. But no guarantees that we'll follow you back. We got to keep our follower ratio looking good too. You know, we're a state agency. So, but please follow us. Once again, lots of great information on our social media. Got some great websites for you. csac.ca.gov, that is our main page. dream.csac.ca.gov, that is our California Dream Act application page. And mygrantinfo.csac.ca.gov, that is our web grants page. And web grants, what that is a tool that students can use to check how much state aid they're getting, to check if the schools have lowered their GPA, to check if there's any additional documents being required. Really great tool. Recommend that every student create a web grants account. If you're filling out the California Dream Act application, the login you use for your California Dream Act application, because the California Dream Act application does not have an FSA ID, just has a CADA username and password. That username and password, that's the same one you would use for your web grants. For FAFSA filers, you have to create a separate username and password for your web grants. But once again, really great tool, web grants, highly recommended. And with that being said, thank you so much. I was trying to make sure that I was done by 6. I was going to kind of go through it a little fast. Want to make sure I was respectful of your time. But I hope y'all got a lot of great information from this. As you can see, if y'all have further questions, we have our email down there, studentsupport@csac.ca.gov, or our hotline that's open during business hours, between the hours of 8 a.m. to 4:45 p.m. During business days. Please feel free to call us. Please feel free to email us. But thank you so much. Thank you to Senator Cortese for having us here. Thank you to you and your team. We really appreciate you, and really appreciate you reaching out and telling people about this mission of financial aid. Thank you to the CSAC staff who are answering questions. Israel and Jenny, really appreciate you. We will be sending out, I know I talked to, I believe, Tara, we will be sending out an email with a survey. We've asked that you fill out that survey. That is only for students. If you're a student and you fill out the survey, you have a chance of, you enter into a drawing for a $1,000 scholarship. So anybody who attends our Cash for College workshop and fills out the survey, who's a student, it's only for students, can win a $1,000 scholarship just by filling out the survey, the post-workshop survey. So y'all probably get an email later onwards, but just wanted to let y'all know about that amazing opportunity. And with that being said, doesn't look like there are any questions, so I will hand it back to Senator Cortese's team. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we'll close. You know how to reach out to CSAC or the Senator's office for questions. And thank you so much for those who joined us today.